Moving on from Manchester United, and thank you for that comprehensive update. I wanted to ask you about Arsenal because there's been a lot going on since we last spoke about 8 days ago. A number of fringe players in Norgard brought in. There's Mosquera that agreed personal terms. They're negotiating on the fee, but it does feel that there's been that pivot, and you broke that news. I don't even think people realize that news was broke here on the Football Terrace by yourself, Ben, in relation to Eze being on the list. Since then, it seems to have. I want to be careful with the wording. I don't want to put words in your mouth because aggregators will change it. I don't care about what they say that I say, but I do for you. I'm not going to use the word advanced, but I feel like the conversation has evolved where it's gone from being on the list to conversations, negotiations have started. It feels like a deal that has accelerated somewhat. There's a lot of reports this morning in Spain about Arsenal being willing to pay money for Rodrygo. And there's talk of, Arsenal maybe signing both for a combined fee of around a deal of around 40 million, 140 million pounds. What's your latest updates on Eze and or Rodrygo potentially joining Arsenal?
Yeah, as we broke on the show, Arsenal really like Eberechi Eze. They held a meeting at the weekend. In that meeting with senior people from not just the recruitment team, but the football department as well. And this is a conversation on the player side at the moment, but you would imagine it will advance towards Crystal Palace at some point, and then we wait and see whether a bid is placed. But on the Eze side, they weren't just saying, hey, how are you doing, and having an exploratory conversation. They were starting to discuss terms to understand what Eberechi Eze financially would want if he's to join Arsenal. And my understanding is that Eze is keen on Arsenal, and that Tottenham are not in the race for Eze despite appreciation. So Arsenal have a bit of a clear run here if they choose to proceed. And the feeling with Eze is that he will be a central profile in his preferred attacking midfield, which means that a winger target will be an addition to Eberechi Eze if Arsenal choose to proceed. And I think that there's a very realistic chance that they do. We know that Eze has this all-in release clause of £68 million. Arsenal's perspective is that they would be coming in lower than that. It's another complicated release clause similar to that of Michael Olise that has a very specific way of it being triggered. So at some point, Arsenal are expected to inquire on the mechanism of that clause and then likely come in below it or match it in a way where they ask for different kind of payment terms. So now we wait and see whether that develops. But I've said many times that Arsenal's window under Berta started effectively on July the 1st. And this is why, despite the fear amongst Arsenal fans that Liverpool were moving faster and spending bigger, and that Chelsea and Manchester City were getting business done early because of the Club World Cup, Berta's new to Arsenal. And July is the time because it suits Arsenal due to the new financial year when they're really going to get going. And actually, if you look at Arsenal's window before July, Norgard's coming in. I expect that to be finalised next week. Zubimendi is pre-agreed. I know it hasn't been announced yet, but Zubimendi will be an Arsenal player. Mosquera talks are advancing, and Kepa's been signed. So that's 4 players, either done or near done. Then if you add attacking midfielder, winger, and number 9, which were always July sagas, that's 7 players all around the first team. And that's going to constitute a big, if not statement window for Arsenal. And now we're only 4 days into July. So I'm not surprised it's taken Arsenal this long to really warm up in the window. But they have done business, and they will do the lion's share of their attack-minded business, I'm told, in the month of July, or certainly by the first Premier League game of the season in early August. So that's where we stand at the moment. With Eberechi Eze, my expectation is Arsenal will make a bid, and that bid will come in below Eberechi Eze's release clause. But first, we have to understand how far and how quickly Arsenal are advancing on the player side, because they won't go to Crystal Palace until perhaps they've got all of the information that they need on the player side and that full buy-in. But the talks between Eberechi Eze and Arsenal were positive. He's keen on a move to Arsenal. And now we have to wait for that first approach to Crystal Palace, which as of last night hasn't happened yet, but could of course be imminent. With Rodrygo, another story that I broke that was backed up in the last 48 hours. Rodrygo is going to decide only after the Club World Cup. So despite what may be out there in the next kind of week or two, there'll be nothing clarified at Arsenal's end until Rodrygo has had his conversation with Xabi Alonso. And they will not have that conversation about his future whilst Real Madrid are in the Club World Cup. So if they go all the way, you're talking about mid-July. If they get knocked out, it might happen a bit earlier. But Rodrygo will speak to Xabi Alonso because the new manager changes his perspective a little bit, and he will understand what his pathway and game time is. And naturally, we've known for some time he prefers to play on the left, but Vinny Jr. and Mbappe are there, so he has to play on the right. Arsenal's idea for Rodrygo is twofold. One, to inverse that and have him a left-sided starter, but then maybe say you could occasionally go over to the right if Bukayo Saka is injured or needs cover. And that would create a situation where maybe they would only need an attacking midfielder and a left-wing predominant. The other possibility is that Gabriel Martinelli, Leandro Trossard stay, and then they turn their attention to a right-sided winger, which is where the Noni Madueke appreciation comes in, who maybe can cover the left-hand side. And I think this is what Arsenal are determining at the moment, because regardless of Eze, who's kind of a separate case, if they go down the route of a left winger like Rodrygo, they may also need a big outgoing in the form of either Leandro Trossard, who we know they're also in talks to extend, or Gabriel Martinelli, who, as I've broken repeatedly, is on the list of Al Nassr. And if Al Nassr don't get Luis Diaz, Gabriel Martinelli is very high in their thinking. So we're going to have to understand, is Rodrygo Eze feasible without Martinelli or Trossard going, or would there need to be an outgoing on that left-hand side? I'm not saying that they would have to wait for the outgoing before buying, but the direction of travel may be an exit of Martinelli or Trossard if they're to go for that real box office star. And it's interesting because you could say keep Martinelli and Trossard and sign a player like Madueke who could float to the left, or you could say bring in a star name that would really excite Arsenal fans like Rodrygo, add Eze, but then in likelihood Martinelli or Trossard would have to leave. And this is why it's quite a fluid situation, because Arsenal's perspective right now is that they like Rodrygo, they like Eze, they don't want to sell Martinelli, they're in contract extension talks with Trossard. But if they get a green light from Rodrygo and they say we're going to go for him, the perspective on Martinelli in particular may change. But you can't say that now, because if Rodrygo doesn't come off, the last thing that Arsenal want to do is be telling players there might be a possibility that they'll enter offers for them, which is why I think we're going to have to be more patient on Rodrygo as of now than we are with Eberechi Eze, which could move a little bit quicker. And then the last thing I would say is, remember what we've spoken about on other shows and how Trossard and Martinelli are both extremes, but nothing in the middle. So either they're going to extend one or both, or they're going to sell one of them with probably nothing in between. Or in another case scenario, they're going to extend both. But I don't think there's a situation where they'll keep one or both and just let these contracts run another year. That's not the Arsenal way. So there will be some clarity on both of their futures. And it could well be that in discussing contract renewal talks, they actually get an offer and they pivot. Or it could be that an offer comes in that allows the player to leverage their Arsenal terms, and the end result is actually that despite interest, they end up staying. But again, I don't think we see a situation with Martinelli or Trossard where they just stay at the football club come the end of this window on their current terms.
Yeah, and I felt all along that, again, one of the reasons why maybe Arsenal with the wide positions weren't accelerating too quickly with these deals is because we all knew that Rodrygo's the decision with Real Madrid, Rodrygo, and any certain party to buy him was going to have to wait until after the Club World Cup. So Arsenal, in some respects, would be, I wouldn't say silly, if they went and got Sane, who end up going to, is it Galatasaray or Fenerbahce? Galatasaray.
Yeah,
if they ended up going for him, and then, we might not get Rodrygo, let's execute now. Arsenal fans would do their nut come the middle of July if Rodrygo is then available, but they'd move for Sane. Sane's very good, but at a different stage of his career. And that's where I always get funny with people that don't want patience, is that often in life, like, less haste, more pace. And I feel that Arsenal were in that situation. Question I had, because you kind of alluded to it, there's been talk of kind of offers being made to Chelsea, whether they're official or unofficial, for Madueke. Is there a world when Madueke comes in as cover on the right, but also Rodrygo comes in, or is it very much one major winger that they're going to buy? And as they say, it'll either be Rodrygo on the left covering the right, or Madueke covering on the right and sometimes on the left, but like Martinelli staying. Is that what you've been briefed?
Well, I think there's a possibility that Noni Madueke is seen as right and left-sided. And I would imagine to get a player like him who will want relatively consistent game time, especially in a World Cup year, the pitch to Madueke, if things move, will have to be right-sided Saka competition, but he will know it will be incredibly difficult to start ahead of Saka in big games if Saka's fit. So then move over to that left-hand side and have opportunities there. And Noni Madueke is relatively comfortable on both sides. And I think you don't advance a deal with Noni Madueke without that game time guarantee that you can't have, in my opinion, if you're saying Rodrygo is also going to come in, or a player of that magnitude. So I wouldn't rule out left winger attacking midfield, right winger striker coming in under a scenario where maybe a younger addition comes on the right hand side, or Rodrygo comes on the left hand side. But obviously just using examples, not saying they'll definitely be these specific players. Eze through the centre, Gyökeres, Šeško, Watkins, whoever up top. That possibility is there at the right value with the right profiles, but I don't think they would all be for box office names. I think that one winger would be more established, and in that scenario, another winger would be younger and more of a squad player, a bit like Mosquera coming in, and he will obviously know that you've got William Saliba, Gabriel Magalhaes there, and he's comfortable with that situation. There might be a scenario where it's just one winger, and we alluded to that in the last answer, where Rodrygo can go left or right. So you switch what he's doing at Real Madrid, and you say you're a starting left winger, but we'll cover the right using him as well. And then you have Rodrygo, if needed, on the right. You've got Wanyeri and you've got Saka, and they might see that as enough. Or vice versa. If you don't go down the Rodrygo route, Martinelli, Trossard stay in that scenario. You say Noni Madueke is right predominant to compete with Saka, but he'll need minutes. So he goes over the left-hand side, and perhaps then you don't add another left winger, which may not be a situation that all Arsenal fans love, saying they won't go for Rodrygo, they'll only sign Madueke, they'll try for Eberechi Eze, they'll bring a number 9. But these are the sort of scenarios being discussed internally, and this is why Arsenal are taking their time before placing bids. So the situation is, simply put, Eze is a separate case, largely through the centre, but again, can go over to the left if needed. That may mean that Madueke becomes right-sided competition and you don't add another winger, and then you only add a number 9, and then it'll be 3. It's not impossible it's 4, but it feels unlikely that 4 would be Rodrygo, Eze, Madueke, plus your number 9, only because the overall cost of the deal and the fact that if, and it is an if, Rodrygo was to join Arsenal, it's so obvious he is your starting left winger, and then it is so likely that one of Martinelli, Trossard will stay, that if you were Noni Madueke and the pitch was you'll get some time on the left, sometime on the right, the player may then start to have reservation if he thinks that's the direction of travel. The other thing I would add is that